Hi guys, this is Doug Fletcher and you're listening or watching What's the Hazard? It is January 28th, Friday. We're in Omaha, Nebraska. Cold, about 10 degrees this morning.
It was a little chilly coming
A little
up.
chilly driving down.
Yeah.
But hey, things are supposed to look up this weekend. We're supposed to get a little bit warmer, so at least there is something to look forward to. And I'm sure there are many things to look forward to. What current events? Let's talk about that. There are two things on my mind right now. One is OSHA record keeping. For those of you that are required to keep records for OSHA, you know that we've got a deadline coming up here, February 1st. We've got to be posting our 300A, our summary form. So we'll talk a little bit about OSHA record keeping. And then I've got quarterly taxes due. Man, that's always a nightmare. My record keeping, I guess I shouldn't be revealing this perhaps, but my record keeping isn't necessarily the best. My financials and stuff, I have a really good friend, a family member, actually. My sister-in-law helps me with that stuff. She's brilliant, so she helps keep me out of trouble. But at the end of the year, I have to pay, my subcontractors have to get 1099s and stuff, and so it's always kind of a pain in the ass at the end of the year, man. So we'll skip over that tax thing, and let's talk a little bit about OSHA record keeping. If you are required to keep records for OSHA, most of you probably are, and you're familiar with this system, just keep in mind a couple of things, just a few notes, things that I have seen over the years that have been somewhat problematic. Number one, OSHA record keeping is not workers' compensation. They're two separate and distinct programs, oftentimes found on the same office or desk. You might have to do both, but just keep in mind that workers' compensation is a liability-based system. Whose fault was it? OSHA record keeping is a geographic system. Did it occur in the work environment? So did we have an employee that sustained an injury or an illness in the work environment? And it's truly just geographical. The work environment can be a facility, could be a job site, could be a piece of equipment. If you're traveling on behalf of the employer, doing work on the behalf of the employer on the road, it could be a restaurant or something for that matter. So it is a geographic relationship. And sometimes that's a hard one to take if you're the safety manager. Sometimes some of the things that OSHA requires us to record don't sit well. They don't always make sense. So just keep in mind, because work comp denies something doesn't mean that it may not be OSHA recordable. The other thing I would say is that there are consequences to recording improperly. If you are a habitual under-recorder and OSHA finds out about that, they don't like that. Some of the biggest citations that I saw while I was with OSHA were the result of improper record keeping.
I was always the one to be, if you were for sure, write it down.
Yeah.
And then you can always reevaluate.
You can always, and you should.
Turn it in.
That's great advice, man. And that's really good advice, Mike. If you are unsure, put it on the log. And at the end of the year, when you do your review, you can always remove it from the log.
Right.
But, yeah, you want to be careful about that. The downside of that is I know a lot of people that they record things simply because they want to be acting in good faith. They want to be good actors. They want to be doing the best they can. And they do record things that shouldn't be on the log. And then when we get to this point where we're doing our summaries, and then some of you are going to have to submit this information electronically.
Yep.
We've got the new tracking application, so you have to, some of you will report this information to OSHA electronically. They use that information to target inspections. So if your numbers are too high, your DART rate is inflated, inappropriately or unnecessarily, you could get an inspection as a result of that. So we want to do the best we can with record keeping. Probably 95% of the incidents, maybe in your experience too, are fairly straightforward. And then you get a few of these crazy outliers. My parting comment is going to be this. When I was with OSHA, I took record-keeping training from the guys that wrote this regulation, okay? Jim Maddox, Dave Schmidt, two guys out of the OSHA National Office, put this regulation together back in 2002. They sent a bunch of us to Chicago for training. I spent 5 days in Chicago getting record-keeping training, if you can imagine anything more painful. And, so at that time, I knew record-keeping pretty well. And we got hundreds and hundreds of calls about record-keeping questions. And we'd be able to figure them out. We could talk through them, see how the criteria applied, and either record it or not. Every now and then you'd get a crazy one. And I would call Schmidt out in D.C., Dave Schmidt. I'd say, Dave, it's Fletch out in Omaha. Hey, man, what's going on? I got a crazy one for you. What do you think of this? And I'd give him this scenario, and he'd think about it for a minute, and then he'd go, I have no idea. What do you think? And I'm like, Dave, you wrote the regulation, man. What were you thinking when we were? He goes, there was no way we could consider every possible scenario. So just do the best you can. And that's my advice to people is just do the best you can.
I think one of the hardest ones was pre-existing conditions.
Yes.
Pre-existing injuries. A guy goes to the gym, strains his back, comes in our facility throw steel, and then all of a sudden I have a back injury and I'm out for 10 days recuperating on the back, and you're stuck with that, So
that's a great comment, man, because those are some of the most challenging. Did an event or exposure in the work environment either significantly aggravate that pre-existing condition? That's a tough one. And I think I hate to be this guy, but I think there are times when employees aren't completely honest about some of those things. Maybe they feel like they would rather have the company pay for some of that stuff than have to pay for it themselves, perhaps.
We had a really good one where an employee complained about a back injury, and he made the mistake of telling another employee that he heard it at the gym, but he was going to make the company pay for it. And so going back, we had talked to the owners of the gym and got video of him weightlifting and then holding his back after a bench press.
Wow, interesting.
And so we used that for our evidence, and then we went and talked to the attorneys and the workman comp people, and they're like, oh, yeah, we're denying that claim.
Interesting.
So
that's interesting, man.
Yeah. If you have those connections, that's probably the most important part about being in tune with the guys on the floor.
Yeah.
That they can come and tell you about stuff like that.
Yeah.
Whether it's turning in their buddy or whatever, but it's just coming to you and going, hey, so I heard so-and-so say this, and, I don't, this is a good company to work for. I don't want to see them have to pay for this because it's stupid.
Isn't that interesting?
So I thought it was very enlightening that you have that type of relationship with people.
It is. Well, it speaks volumes about the relationship you would have, the trust that you would have, and the fact that the employees care about the well-being of the company. That's pretty impressive, too. Well, that brings me to my guest, Mike Froberg. We've known each other for probably about 7 or 8 years.
Yeah, it's been a while.
And it started, you were actually the safety coordinator at Norfolk Iron and Metal.
Yep.
Which was an interesting facility, and we did some work together up there. Just recently, you took a new job.
Yep.
And now you are...
August, I became the emergency management director for Stanton County.
Interesting. And even before then, when you were working for Norfolk Iron and Metal, for NIM, you were doing other, weren't you on the volunteer fire or some other?
Still am. I'm on 3 volunteer fire squads right now, running EMS. So
are you like an EMT or a paramedic or something?
No, EMT, yep.
Are you really?
Yep.
Oh, man, that's incredible. So
I'm on the kind of the advanced side because I can do IVs and do airway and all that stuff.
So you're just kind of a guy who is drawn to service. It sounds like. That's just something that's
public
good.
Service.
Yeah, that's cool. So let's go back to the NIM. Let's go back to Norfolk Iron and Metal. Really interesting plant. Talk a little bit about what you guys did, and then let's just talk a little bit about your experiences as the safety coordinator.
So I was at Norfolk Iron for 23 years in total. Started out as an order picker. What Norfolk Iron is it's one of the nation's largest service centers. So what they do is they buy in bulk from a metal supplier like the Nucors, and then they break it down and sell it by piece to different customers throughout the nation. And they've grown exponentially over the last few years.
So you were dealing with like sheet metal, tube metal,
all kinds of it. Yep, sheet metal, expanded metal, flats, angle, channel, beams, big round tubes, rebar. They had a decoiler, which is a coil line and a temper mill line. That temper mill line would use up to 8 million pounds of pressure to flatten out a piece of coil to get it to laser flatness. So there's some challenges there.
Cut laser tables, all sorts of different cutting.
Laser tables and saw tables, torches.
It was cool.
So it was a lot.
It was big.
Yeah.
And you had big shit in that plant, man. It was always kind of intimidating.
There's about 300 employees in that warehouse alone.
How did you? I don't mean to get off track here, but how did you? You were mentioning the relationship that you had with the employees, and the fact that they were willing to come and share information with you that that made.
I think some of that.
How did you get to that point?
Some of it starts with I started out on the floor. I started out as an order picker and then worked my way up. So for about 11 of those years, the 23, I was on the floor doing something.
Side by side with these guys.
Yep. Order picking, forklift operator, as a shag operator, crane operator, as a lead man for shipping and receiving. I ran our rebar division for 5 years. Then worked maintenance for a while there. So you get to know a lot of these guys on the floor. And then the last 12 years I was there as the safety coordinator. So when I first started there, their record was pretty good until they had a fatality. And then I think, and you were there for that one.
Yeah.
And then after that, it just seemed like it was like the whole air was let out of the balloon, right? So over the years, they had a lot of recordable injuries. So when I first started, they had 16 recordable injuries in a year. So my main goal was to work with the guys on the floor and then figure out, I want to reduce this by half. Like, I know going 0 recordables overnight is not going to happen, right? So help me get this down to half. So we, and we kind of had that relationship of where our training was at, what we were doing. Working in a steel industry like that, there's a lot of things that can go wrong really quick. So, we did it. We were able to do half by the following year. And so that was just the goal. I'm like, okay, so we got 8 this year. Let's go for 4 next year.
No kidding.
And just kind of take it, it's how do you eat an elephant, one bite at a time. So I said our ultimate goal is obviously going to be 0. How that happens, it's going to take everybody, including management. So, my years there too, we went through a lot of operations managers and general managers, and the management crew that they have in place now is pretty solid. They're very supportive of the guys on the floor, as far as the safety wise, at least it was when I was there before I left. So, it was pretty good. But I think knowing what that job entails on the floor and having done it, it's a lot easier for somebody to call out BS when they come up and say, well, I was throwing steel like this and there's just no other way to do it. I'm like, yeah, there is. I will show you. I will get my 250-pound ass up on the forklift.
Right, and show you exactly how to do it.
So
that's a great point, man. That is a great point. And that is not true for people that come in without having had that experience.
And
they have to earn some.
So I was on the safety committee for about 10 years there. Even when I was off of not being the safety coordinator, I was a safety committee member. And I had applied for that job previously and got turned down, and they gave it to an outsider who used to work at Lindsay, came in, and they're basically, their thought process was, well, we just want a different set of eyes. You're probably too much into this. You're, you know all the tricks, all the shortcuts, and I took a lot of shortcuts, I'm not going to lie. But the other thing was that, he didn't last but 6 months because he just could never build that relationship with the guys. He kind of came in and said, well, this is the way it's going to be, and if you don't like it, you can find another job, and that's not how you approach the guys.
I understand. I appreciate that.
Yeah, man. So he lasted about 6 months, and then the job came open again, and then I reapplied and interviewed for it and got it. And I just said, I'm not here to reinvent the wheel, but there's obviously a lot of things we need to work on.
Well, so. You mentioned knowing the shortcuts might have perceived that as a problem, but the reality is if you understand why the guys are taking shortcuts, you can address that from their perspective, which I think is really important.
It's hard not to be hypocritical or like the guys going, for the first couple of years I was doing this, I would be like, hey, you can't do this. Are you kidding me? Like
you're the one that taught me.
Yeah. We watched you do this all the time. I'm like, yeah, do as I say, not as I do kind of thing. But I said, yeah. And I said, no, it wasn't right. I said, I wish I would have had somebody in this position telling me that it wasn't right, because I could have gotten seriously hurt. I got lucky, right? I wasn't taking shortcuts to take shortcuts. It's kind of how I was taught. And then I just figured out my own way to do it.
And you just learned how to survive within that world of shortcuts.
Yeah. And it's like I said, in the steel industry, you have thousands and thousands of pounds of steel moving over your head, above you, not over your head, but above you, around you, forklifts moving all the time.
Yeah.
We're loading, they do like 30 some trucks a night, up to 60 trucks a day. Yeah. And so it's constantly moving steel there. So there's a lot of things that can go wrong. You block one little bundle wrong and the whole pile falls over. You don't hook up a chain right and you get a little swing in your spreader bar, you drop the whole load, and then you have to worry about your not just your drop zone, but where's that material going to bounce to, right, and where you're at. So it was a lot of, and there's been times where I've had to jump off a trailer just to
avoid
getting hit by a load or something. And so, and I know that's the biggest common thing now too. Before I was leaving, they were worried about fall protection for trailers.
Yeah, that's a real tough one, man. We can talk a little bit about that, but that is a really challenging issue. So at the end though, I mean, you were talking about, reasonable goals. How do we just reduce by half and keep chipping away at that? And you were able to do that, which is remarkable. How did things end up for you when you were getting ready to leave?
Right when I was going or leaving, I think they had one recordable for the year, but that was after almost 800 days of not having a recordable.
Wow, that's incredible.
We started a program called Acceptable Exposures, which took a lot of engagement from not just employees on the floor. Took a lot of trust. Like I said, we had a really supportive management team, even the executive management team. When I first brought this, it was a guy we had talked about, or I got the idea from down in Houston. He was talking about being 19, and they worked at a nitroglycerin plant.
Oh, my God.
And he thought he was going to be the stud because they found that they had a leak in a line, and you have to get your SCBA gear on for all this stuff and before you go in and do anything. And so he thought, I'm just going to be a stud. I know where that valve is. I'm just going to run in real quick, hold my breath, turn that valve off, and come out. And he did it, got the valve shut off, stopped the leak. And he was thinking to himself, man, managers are going to praise me, and this is good. And we prevented a fatality or a possible explosion. And he goes, I got back in and I got fired. He goes, because I took that risk, right? And so we started out the belief of, his main comment was, there's risks every day that we take.
Right.
So when you wake up in the morning and you take a shower, does your risk go up or go down? It goes up.
Always goes
right?
up.
You get in your car and you drive to work, does the risk go up or down? Whether you're wearing a seatbelt, sure, the risk is having an accident, but if you have your seatbelt on, there's a less risk that you're going to get seriously injured. So we kind of took that and formatted it into our own program at Norfolk Iron. So we call it the Acceptable Exposure Program. And what we did is when we rolled this out to the executive management staff, I said, there is going to be a lot of things that are coming up that you're going to hear, you're not going to agree with, because you're going to be like, what the hell, you know?
So explain that a little bit. So acceptable exposure, this is things that the guys were doing that they knew probably wasn't. So
it becomes acceptable behavior.
Okay.
Right. So
it's kind of the culture in the facility.
The culture, right. Okay. So, a guy, well, just in better terms, a guy jumping off a trailer, right? We know that we're not supposed to jump off a trailer. Nobody's saying anything about it.
I got you.
It becomes acceptable, right? You're going to stick your hand underneath of a bundle to put that piece of block in there instead of using a push block or something. And I've done this for 20 some years, right? And I know that if I put my hand underneath there, there's a risk that bundle could fall or the chain could snap or the cable could break. But I'm fast, right? I can get out of the way pretty quick, and I'm not in there that far. It starts becoming an acceptable behavior.
I gotcha.
So, when
so you were asking these guys to share those things with you,
right? So when we talked about this to the management team, we said we're going to do something a little wild. I said, and you have to trust me because I think it's going to work. So I said we're going to be able to eliminate a lot of risk, right? That our guys are taking. So I said, you're going to hear about some things when they present it to us about the risks that they take out there, and you have to know that you're not going to discipline them for it. Because even though we know it's wrong and it may be against our policy, to build that trust, we want to let them know that, hey, identify the risk, let us know what you're doing, but in addition to that, let us know how to make it better, right? So you're going to take this risk of sticking your arm underneath of a bundle. How do we get to the point where you're not having to do that anymore? Do we have to stack the material better? Do we have to maybe have things preset in place before you land it?
Right.
What happens if the bundle falls or your block comes out of alignment? What are we going to do to prepare that? The very first year that we started this program, we had 175 exposures turned in.
That they volunteered
and told us about.
Wow.
And then so what we had decided too was that there was going to be a reward system for that. So if you turned in an acceptable exposure, and this, like I said, this is the very first year, you turned in an acceptable exposure regardless of what it was, you get $25 gift card. Flat out. If you
did they have to give you a solution as well?
Yep.
That was what you were asking.
Yep. So on the form that we made, that was what your risk was, what level of that risk that was, whether it be minimal or extreme.
Okay.
And if we ever hit the extreme category, work stops, and then we'll go out with a team or a safety committee, and we'll figure out what to do, and we'll bring a couple managers out, and then they were very willing to do that too. The managers were like, if you have something that's holy shit, something's going to happen bad, they're going to come out and kind of get their idea too. And you identify the risk, give it a hazard level, what you're going to do to mitigate that risk, right? And then on the bottom of it was a time frame. Can this be done in 0 to 30 days? Is it 6 to 12 months? Or 90 days, or that over a year. And then on the bottom is who is responsible for it, a manager, operations manager, safety coordinator, or the employee on the floor.
And this was all being submitted by the employee?
By the employee.
So they were the ones who was suggesting it might take a year to do this, or it might take management.
They would submit this, everything would get submitted to the safety coordinator, and then once a month, the safety coordinator, the operations manager, general manager, processing manager, maintenance supervisor, and myself would all sit down and we'd go over this program. We would go over everything that was turned in. And then you get maintenance involved because a lot of it had to do with maintenance things. And then the maintenance staff out there was amazing because they would see this and they're like, oh, yeah, we'll have this done. It says marked a year. We'll have it this weekend. We'll get it done. And so the reward part of it was we would sit down and then we would justify the amount of the award. So, if it was something that was basic maintenance or anything like that was pretty easy, or, there was a couple that were turned in where like, no, this isn't, anything, but it would be $25. But if there was a holy crap one and this saved a lot of injury or potential worse, they got $100
nice.
and a gift card. And so that's, in doing so, had eliminated all of our recordables for the first year.
Wow.
0 recordables, 175 exposures turned in.
This is remarkable.
And management was very supportive because they got to see workman comp rates come down, a safer facility, employees engaged more in safety. The culture was changing. There was a win-win for everybody. And then the second year, we kind of reconfigured it a little bit. We're like, okay, so if you're going to tell me that you're still putting your hand underneath the bundle, now we have a behavior. It's not so much a culture out there or an acceptable risk. It's you're doing something wrong because we've already talked about this and we've already mitigated it.
Yeah, interesting. That's a very subtle but important difference between those two because, as you said, if you are having people submit these acceptable exposures, this is how we do our work because we get our work done more efficiently or faster, whatever it is, it's more comfortable to do it this way. But we know there's an exposure here, a hazard. It's part of our, local culture. It's part of the, the group dynamic. And those things are going on in every facility.
Oh yeah.
So to get them to reveal that initially is really amazing. My mouth is hanging open because that's so impressive. But then, as you said, once we've identified it, once we've made attempts to mitigate it based on your suggestions, and it continues, then we've kind of crossed that line.
Yep.
From this is like acceptable culturally within our facility to, as you've said, now you're basically choosing to behave inappropriately.
And we've changed a lot of our training based on that, and it was amazing to see where you have a order picker doing something just totally off the wall, right? And now we know, hey, based on the experiences that we've had, what the risks that were turned in, excuse me, and how you wanted to mitigate that, we have to train that now, right? So
of course,
all of the training, a lot of the training documentation got replaced with, hey, so this is an acceptable exposure. We did it all for our new hire orientation too. We talked about the acceptable exposure program because it was that important to everybody on the floor to know that even when you're coming in as a new employee, hey, we care so much about your safety that if you feel that you're unsafe in something, we have an open door policy for a reason, right? And you can tell any type of manager and they're not going to be like, just get back to work. They're going to sit down and listen to you. And if you need help filling out a form, the managers were actually sitting down and saying, hey, that's a really good idea. You need to fill this out. Right. And then, cause we want to make sure that you get credit for that.
Yeah.
And so,
so was this something that you did from the beginning when you first took over the safety coordinator role,
no.
or this is something that you basically evolved into? So as you were bringing those recordables down each year, this is kind of what got you into that home stretch 0.
Yep. So it was probably in the last, we started it in like 2018 because 2018 we had a really bad year. And so we kind of formulated this plan at the end of the year and saying, hey, this is enough. Like, that we're taking risks out there. Right. We need your help on the management side and on the employee side. And we had that discussion with everybody. And the good thing about it is we had, so there's security cameras all over in a place like that. And it wasn't, there's a lot of employees who are like, well, you're just Big Brother watching out for us. I'm like, no, that's not the case. We have a lot of accidents. And so we went up to get high def cameras in every place so we could catch them on film having the accidents, and we can study that, and then we can learn from it. So we had a montage of film at the end of the year, at the end of 18. And when we started this program in 19, we pulled up all those videos. And we're like, hey, so-and-so did this. You know you're not supposed to do that. You know, and so this is the program that we're going to start. And then, we started that program in 2019.
So you weren't necessarily using that video to go out and punish people.
No, and it was really interesting because we had a supervisor that was on 2 of our videos doing something that he shouldn't have been doing.
Mm-hmm.
And and that was one of the driving factors too. I'm like, hey, so if you're going to have somebody in a leadership position taking these shortcuts, doing the stuff like this, what's that tell the yellow hat?
Absolutely.
Right next to you, or the general employee.
Mm-hmm.
It's if the supervisor can get away with it,
of course,
I sure as hell can.
Of course.
Right. And so,
must be acceptable.
So we had, one of the supervisors is still a really good friend of mine, was in my wedding. We were friends. We've been friends for 30 years. What got me one day was I watched him almost get killed on camera because he was, they were loading sheets. A crane operator was bringing over a load of sheets, and they were going to be putting it in a bundle straightener because the customer wanted completely squared bundles. And so he's watching his paperwork, and then he's kind of watching a truck back in. Well, a new crane operator, probably a couple months in yet, still really not really signed off even, started to get a little swing in the bundle and kind of just froze, right? Bundle swung and came down, and James was lucky enough to run out of the way. And so I had, that got me thinking, man, I almost lost a friend here, and I pulled him in my office. I'm like, dude, you've got to pay attention. Like, you've been at this as long as I have. I was your crane operator when you were a sheet loader, and this right here, that scares the death out of me.
Crap out of him, yeah.
And he's my neighbor behind me, so it's like I'm like, I'm going to miss those barbecues when you want to bring down something that you're smoking.
Right.
But I said, we watched our kids grow up together, and we know each other's families, and we're really good friends. And I said, this scared me. Like it got me mad at one point that you would take that risk. But so we started playing that in the break room, just on a loop.
No shit.
Like, I didn't even care who saw it, whether it's a manager, a new employee, seasoned employee, a truck driver, commercial driver that came in, vendors that came in, customers that came in, because the customers too, this is the risk that some of these guys are taking to get your product to you.
Right.
That was an eye-opening experience for a lot of people on the floor too.
Yeah.
Like, wow, that was stupid close. So, when we had started the program, we started playing all these videos. And my biggest thing on there was, I'm not playing these videos to call anybody out. I'm not playing these videos so you guys can go out on the floor and make fun of people. But you have to understand these are the risks that we're taking, and we have to do better, right? And then it got to the point where, oh my God, I don't want to be on Froberg's videos. So
I'll bet. Yeah, but
don't do anything stupid. You're going to be on the TV for the next week,
right?
So, but yeah, it was a good program.
This is one of the most remarkable things I've ever heard of. First of all, just to be able to gain that level of trust within the workforce, to get them to bring these things forward, remarkable. The program in and of itself, I think, is remarkable. I mean, because we know this goes on in every facility. Every facility I've ever been in, every construction work site, this is going on every day. People are taking risks knowingly, but it's become part of their culture. It's acceptable, as you said, even though it's probably violating a policy. Probably the managers or the supervisors know about it because this is how we do our jobs, and to be able to, I'm almost speechless, which is inconceivable, But this is really impressive, man. And I've never heard about it in this level of detail. We've talked about it before,
Yep.
but I didn't truly understand what you were talking about. And just the fact that you can do this without rancor or whatever, without the intent of punishing people, that we truly just want to understand better where these exposures exist and opportunities to improve them.
And that's the biggest thing. You have a lot of business owners that watch and listen to your podcast and watch your podcast, supervisors, managers. It is the most important thing that if you're going to run a program like that and the employees are trusting you to say, I'm taking this risk, man. I think I have a better way of doing it. Do not discipline them. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be times where the discipline obviously is going to be warranted, but if you're trying to get this program and you're trying to change the culture and you're trying to get your program to this level 1 program, mm-hmm. right? It is imperative that you gain that trust of the employees on the floor. And that was, it probably wasn't the easiest thing for our managers to hear either, mm-hmm. And especially the owner of the company, and the good thing about it is even the owner spent time on the floor, right? So in all of our facilities, growing up.
Oh, really?
That was kind of one of the biggest things. Is you're not gonna run a company unless you do the work, mm-hmm. right? The Robinsons are a phenomenal family. I have a lot of respect for the Robinsons, and so Arnie's kind of running the show now, I think, but he was very instrumental in giving us the green light, right? Wow. So he even came up and said, this program is really amazing. We want to get it to all of the facilities.
Absolutely.
And so he would even come down and talk to the guys, second shift, first shift, come down at lunch, and he was very interactive of, well, how many acceptable exposures did you guys turn in this month, right? Mm-hmm. How many risks have you guys identified this month? And keep doing it. Keep putting them in. Yeah. We love to hear about it.
Well, he was obviously he was willing to pay for it. He was mm-hmm. the one funding all of that.
Yeah, and I think the first year, I think we spent. I think it was up to $6,000.
Good.
Right. So there was a lot of stuff turned in, but it was it. I think they're still using the program. I think they were before I left. Mm-hmm. Continues to work for them. And it just builds that confidence with your employees and the managers. I
hope it's still working for them. But I will say, though, that oftentimes programs like this that work are related to a person. The trust factor that they had in you probably had a lot to do with this, and the whole, I don't want to be on Froberg's video list. Right. I don't want to be on those things. I hate to say it, but I think those things are oftentimes just related to the charisma or personality of an individual. And sometimes when that person leaves, I'm not suggesting that it isn't working the same, but that can be difficult. It can be difficult to sustain things that are so tied to that individual, So to your credit, hopefully it was embedded well enough that they were able to sustain it, but I don't know, man.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't really talked to much of the guys, so I've been pretty busy.
Well, I would almost want to wrap after that because that was, like I said, this is one of the most impressive things I've ever heard. And I'd kind of like to end on that note, but I want to hear about the new gig. So tell me a little bit about the new gig, emergency manager.
Have you ever drank from a fire hose?
I have not. I try to avoid that. I've drunk out of one of those what do you call those? Beer bong things.
Oh, beer, yeah.
That was a long time ago. I want to make very clear. But keg stands, I think, those kind of things. But is that what it's like?
Yeah, it is. It is information overload. And when you're in the safety role, your 1910, your 1926 standards just become, I've studied this for 10 years, right? It's like, hey, I need to learn about something about hazardous communications. Oh, yeah, 1910, 1200. Easily rattle that off. You can't do that anymore because, like,
really,
yeah, it's everything changes all the time. It's all based on scenarios. So as an emergency,
talk a little bit about what it is. What is emergency management?
Emergency management has basically 4 core criteria: planning, preparing, exercise, mitigation, recovery,
and what
response.
What kind of emergencies are we talking about?
So any man-made,
industrial, or
any man-made or natural disasters.
Natural as well.
Yep. So tornadoes, floods.
Oh gosh. Okay.
Stuff
Chemical
like that.
releases,
Chemical
fires.
release. A lot of emergency management is your ability to assist the incident commanders on scene with resources. Like you're their go-to guy if the event is getting way more than they can handle.
Okay.
I'm the guy that has to get them other resources, whether it be from mutual aid agreements with other communities or state resources, or, if it's like Pilger. I was the deputy director when Pilger got hit with the tornadoes. And my job on the ground was just to chase the tornado until it got out of our county and then do search and rescue right afterwards. And so the amount of damage that was there ended up calling in federal partners, right? So we had quite a bit of a response there. But, the other thing is a part of the emergency management gig now is you're with a region, basically for Homeland Security. So we're part of the Northeast Planning, Exercise, and Training region. So we're responsible for doing all the planning exercises and training with all the fire departments and exercising our local emergency operating procedures. You have a plan, you create your plan, you sit down and do a tabletop about your plan, then you do a full-scale exercise on that plan, and then you do an after-action report on what went wrong, what went right.
Gotcha.
Any changes that you would have to do, and it has to be done annually. But it's the biggest thing now is grant writing. I've never really done much grant writing. So learning how to do that. And then you have to follow the federal Code of Federal Regulations, 2 CFR 200. So reading through all those and realizing that, wow, there's a lot more stuff in here than just getting some money and getting equipment.
Yeah.
But, it's information overload.
Wow.
But it's fulfilling.
Right.
So it's a life of public service that I've wanted to do for a while.
Oh, good for you, man.
Healthy pay cut, right?
Yeah.
So, but you look at the freedoms that you have, and and it's kind of starting from scratch on building relationships, because a lot of people don't know what an emergency management does, right? So,
but you've kind of had some of those relationships with the fire departments and some of those entities already from your previous life.
And we have over. So we have 2 core fire departments within our county. There's one in Pilger, one in Stanton. Great bunch of people on both sides. Very knowledgeable about what they're doing and how to do their jobs. And then we have a smaller fire department in Woodland Park, but it's a part of another fire department in a different county.
Okay.
So basically it's like a Station 2 to Hoskins. So I run on EMS calls for all 3 of those within the county. So if there's a emergency somewhere and they need an additional EMT, I can go to those calls and stuff.
Do you sleep?
Not much.
I was going to say, it doesn't sound like there's
I tell you what, you asked me what keeps me up at night, and it is are we ready?
Yeah. Oh my God, of course.
Right. So like you're probably never fully ready for an emergency.
Oh no. Depending
on what you have, but it's, how do you notify 3,000 to 4,000 people about how to manage 4,000 people and more, because you're going to have out of county family wanting to come in. So we had that in Pilger, right? So half the town of Pilger gets wiped out. A couple fatalities that we had there. We had called what they call as an all call right after the event, which means any available rescue fire department come to Pilger, because we need help doing search and rescue through all the residents and homes. And you get that many people together, and that I think that's where the most important thing comes, where you talk about a NIMS, a National Incident Management System, and an incident command system, where you have an IC guy, you have the safety and accountability and people that are making you a list of what ambulance is going where with how many people, whatever. We lacked that in the very first hour probably. And so it was, I kind of go back to my dash cam that I had on it, and I kind of use it for training for my own purpose. Like, okay, so we get here, this is what happened. I was the first one on the scene with a state patrolman and one of the Madison County deputy guys, because our current sheriff's office and fire departments were dealing with another house that had collapsed from a tornado in Stanton. So it was, and at the time, I hadn't been through any of the ICS stuff, right? So I was just a storm chaser, spotter guy, and then just reporting everything back to our EOC as I was seeing it. And, you get kind of thrown in as a baptism by fire type of thing.
Of course.
But I go back and refer back to that. I'm like, man, knowing what I know now, like this whole thing would have been handled probably a little differently. But it's so taking all the ICS classes, and it's probably like your 5 days of doing training log stuff.
Record keeping, yeah, man.
It's dry. Some of it's a lot of repetitive stuff.
Sure.
But it's worth it in the end. And you work with, so I work with a bunch of different emergency managers in our region. You want to talk about a knowledge staff is amazing. You want to go to them and just soak up whatever they have to tell you, because they've been doing it for a really long time, and they're very in tune to, you need Form 213.
Right.
Sure. Where do I get that?
Right, exactly.
So,
or just who to talk to, what to talk about, what questions to ask. I mean,
and I kind of came into the role, I was kind of thrown into the role because they had an emergency manager there who was kind of part-time guy for like 30 years, right? And it tears me up because he put in his retirement papers to retire around Christmas of 19, and a couple days later had a heart attack. And so as we were up at the hospital, I was with a couple of the sheriff's office deputies, our deputy director at the time. I was the assistant to the deputy director, and I called the commissioners to tell them what was happening, and this is going on. And they said, "Well, you're the interim director."
Yeah.
Right. So you have to, you got to call the state watch center. You have to notify them. We have to get a lot of things done. So when I got in there, like their emergency operations center was in this gentleman's basement. So all the equipment and everything was down in his basement. So a lot of stuff in his garage. We didn't have a place to go. So that was my responsibility, was trying to figure out, okay, we're going to do an inventory of all the equipment, pull everything out of the house, put it somewhere, right? So since I've been there, we've started a small emergency operations center in the courthouse, updated a lot of equipment. We're actually doing a lot of drone stuff now, search and rescue with drones. We do a bunch of overwatch for fire departments at a house fire for accountability.
Okay.
We can actually see hot spots. We can actually see where the firemen are going. We do a lot of accident reconstruction mapping for the sheriff's office. So we've added a lot of this stuff, and we're able to now, we just got this thing called an AMV mobile box where it hooks up to the Wi-Fi in my truck, and it's live streaming. So whatever I'm flying on the drone on a natural disaster, people in like NEMA at the Nebraska Emergency Management Agency can see it. Our EOC Operations Center can see it. Commissioners can see it on their phone.
Interesting. Wow.
So, and it's a lot of technology. So I'm bringing, 19th century things up to the 21st century, and it was a matter of like 6 months to a year. So it was quite a lot in a little bit of time. Mm-hmm. But
that's remarkable, man.
And it's the same thing.
And those tools are incredibly useful for what you're describing.
Man,
so you don't have to put bodies
amazing.
in those harm's way necessarily.
There was a story down in Dallas, Texas, where they were chasing a subject. The police were chasing a subject, and this subject went and hid in a tree line with a 30-06, and it was over a hill. And he was waiting for officers to come up over the hill, mm-hmm. and he was going to start taking them out. Well, they had a drone, and so they went over and flew over this person with the drone and seen exactly where he was. So it was a lot better for officer safety.
Absolutely.
And then they could communicate with that guy through the drone. Mm-hmm. So, it's situations like that where mm-hmm. the new technology that they have out there is just way more safer for everybody.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So it's we have a lot of that equipment, and we're starting to get a little more and more. The biggest thing that I have is a lot of support from our commissioners. So I'm responsible to answer to 3 commissioners in Stanton County, and all 3 of them have been on board. I give them a quarterly report of what we're doing, what's going on. They didn't understand really what emergency management did either. A lot of people just think, it's storm chasing, right? It's a guy that's going to tell us about the weather. Right. But there is so much stuff behind the scenes that nobody else sees. Mm-hmm. It's making sure your LEOP plans are up to date, working with the fire departments, trying to acquire equipment, grant writing, making sure that your all of your members are up to date on training on ICS classes, because if they're not, you don't get grant funding or you don't get federal funding.
I see, yeah.
So,
do you have any benefactors, any rich people that like donate equipment and stuff, or companies or anybody that will occasionally, or have you started asking?
So I haven't really asked much. We do have Nucor is within mm-hmm. our county. Mm-hmm. They're very supportive of emergency response people. They have always have been. It didn't really matter what type of manager or what manager they had out there or what general manager they had. Nucor as a whole has been very supportive of first responders and stuff like that in their communities. So, they've been very supportive of getting us some needed equipment from time to time. Mm-hmm. But I'm not really the kind of guy to go around and ask for handouts. Yeah. If I can make it work, we'll make it work. If I can get a grant somewhere.
Terrific.
We just got, we picked up a $43,000 grant from FEMA and the Homeland Security for putting in a generator.
Fantastic.
So that's, $43,000 that our taxes don't have to pay or come up with. So, it's very demanding at times, but yeah, I stayed up till probably midnight working on a hazard response plan. Mm-hmm. That has to be due by the 1st of March. So trying to get all that equipment gathered up and resources. But.
Interesting. And the little bit of exposure that I've had to incident command and emergency response type things, it is overwhelming. There is so much, particularly some of like these mutual aid agreements and equipment. Where do we get more equipment if we need more equipment? How do we coordinate all of that? It's just remarkable, man. And my piece of it has always just been as a safety advisor, giving information about safety and health issues or something, just that small piece of it. Yeah. I can't imagine, man. You're the perfect guy for the job.
Well, our biggest thing now is so FEMA wants you to have all of your stuff documented and tagged. So if you're at a event, especially a long event, you scan that fire truck in, and it starts taking a tally of the hours that that truck has been on scene.
You're using like QR codes or some type of.
There's a rapid tag system that you print off rapid tags, especially after like a tornado or a flood. Mm-hmm. But
do you do the same thing with the guys, with the responders? How long they've been on scene, and what, just keep in touch on that.
And that's the biggest part of working with fire departments too. And I'm still kind of getting into that part of it. You know, I don't have a lot of time to sit down and train with the fire departments yet, just because you're kind of demanded to do all these other classes, and then with the Northeast region, we're always traveling to another county for meetings or trainings or whatever. So it's you end up having their own card. They get an ID card, so you scan them into a scene or out of a scene. And then FEMA, once you start asking for reimbursement for a large scale event, they're going to want to know that stuff. They're, well, how so you had this truck there for 5 hours? Well, prove it. You know, and you know, for the longest time, you're like, well, you're going to take our word for it.
Right, I saw it.
Right. And now when you scan them in and scan them out, you know, everything is it's there on paper. It's hard to argue. Yeah. So trying to get that system set up is a little difficult.
I'll bet.
You know, and it kind of relates to, you know, my time at Norfolk Iron, where you want to talk about trust and relationships. You know, you have 4,000 people that need to trust that you have their interests at heart and their safety at heart. So, you know, we have an emergency management page on Facebook, you know, and we try to put out a lot of information to the public using that, whether it be weather, upcoming events, anything that has to deal with, you know, something that can hurt our residents either physically or financially, you know, the scams that are out there and stuff. And IRS puts out a lot of things. The feds put out a lot of stuff that we share. And some people get a little annoyed with all the information overload, or they kind of question if it's emergency management's responsibility or not. And, you know, my job is to inform the public. So, you know, so whether you can agree or disagree with it, but it's going to get out there if it's going to prevent somebody from getting hurt or lose a lot of money.
Absolutely.
Especially preparedness. I mean, that's my biggest thing is I want people prepared. Right. I want people to be able to make it through an event with limited issues. Right. Well, hey, I knew that I had to go to the basement because, you know, we had a tornado warning, and I knew that after a tornado took out our house, I knew exactly what to do afterwards because we were taught, we were told. Makes everybody's life a lot easier.
Yeah. Preparedness is an interesting thing, you know, and having, again, been limited exposure to that, involvement in that, but being prepared for an event that really is indescribable. You have no way of knowing what it might involve, the magnitude, any of those things. You know, you have to cover so many bases. You have to have, you know, it requires so much forethought, practice. Oh, yeah. You know, as you commented, drills, practice, scenarios, tabletops, you know, post-incident reviews, all of that kind of stuff. I mean, it is. I'm overwhelmed for you, man.
That's the stuff that I'm trying to get in tune with, because I've never put on an exercise. You know, I mean, we've had training at Norfolk Iron, of course. You know, a lot of training in CPR and what do we do if a bundle falls. You know, the amount of scale that you have for a public event is a little bit different. You know.
Oh yeah.
So yeah,
and,
it's
and the range of responses, you know, people who know what to do, who step up, and people who freeze and panic, and everything in between.
There's probably one portion that I have never taken into consideration is the fight or flight with people, right? So, you know, I know that I'm going to have people that are not going to be able to perform their job because it's large, it's
too much
full scale, it's too much. So it's so that's the biggest, you know, and I know that it probably frustrates our fire departments a little bit too, because they're like, man, it's like we need to do this training. You have to put this training on, and it's me telling them, I know we have to put the training on. I just don't know how to do it yet, right? So I'm learning. Yeah, give me some time.
Absolutely.
You know, it may take a year before we can get something figured out, but that's the most important part too of working with other emergency managers is they've done this before. They know the training. They know what is required and what needs to happen. So, and they're more than willing to come down and help put on a training exercise. So
the type of people that they are, that's what they do.
Yep.
It's incredible. Man, I don't know about you, but I am exhausted just listening to everything that you have to do. It makes me.
That's why I brought you coffee.
Yeah, I was going to say yes, and thank you for the coffee, the Black Rifle. I appreciate it. I've been seeing and reading about it, and I see they're on LinkedIn. I see stuff that they post periodically. I'm looking forward to drinking it, man. This has been incredible. I have no idea where we are time-wise, but I need another cup of coffee. I'm exhausted.
Your sound man's sleeping, so it might have been a little too long.
We went over. I have to tell you, thank you so much. You are obviously a guy who is drawn to service. They're lucky to have you in Stanton County. This is really interesting stuff. And the Acceptable Exposure program that you guys implemented up at Norfolk Iron and Metal is something that every company should be doing. It was truly remarkable. I appreciate you sharing all the details of that. I would offer up a contact for you, but you don't have time to be answering people's questions. So
I can. I mean, I'll get you an email.
You can send me an email, or I'll post that or something on LinkedIn
when
we send this stuff out, because that's a program everybody should be running, man. Everyone. It was remarkable. So thank you for your time, buddy.
Yeah, we'll definitely have and I'll have if you want the piece of paper that we used.
I would love to see it. I'd love to send that out too, or at least share what you feel comfortable sharing. But again, this acceptable, it's something everybody should be doing. It was really, and obviously had really good results. So thanks. I appreciate your driving down. It was a 2-hour drive down here to come here and share this. I didn't mention to you that there's no compensation probably. But I know you're a giver.
You know what? I heard that there was a pop machine.
There is a pop machine you can take.
So
we can go fill up a 55-gallon drum with whatever your beverage of choice is and send you home with that, man. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, no problem. I appreciate it.
It was fantastic. Excellent information. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate your listening or watching. Man, this is really, there's a lot to digest here. So give it a couple of listens and find your takeaways. First and foremost, though, man, it's all about relationships. It always comes back to relationships. And so keep that in mind when you're out there doing your thing, and we'll talk to you next week. Later.